For centuries, words attributed to Jesus were interpreted literally, shaped by the interests of those who rewrote history. But there is a passage in the Gospels that Cayce saw as spiritual code. Elijah has already come, and they did not know him. Why would Jesus speak like this? Who was this Elijah who returned, and why have most Christians never known about him? Edgar Cayce suggested that John the Baptist was the reincarnation of Elijah, as hinted at in Scripture. But this seemingly symbolic statement was ignored by theologians who preferred to protect the traditional narrative. According to Cayce, this was a clear clue. Jesus was speaking of the soul returning in another body, with a different mission. This changes everything. If John the Baptist was Elijah, then we have textual proof of reincarnation within the Bible itself. Cayce delved deeper into this enigma with his mediumistic readings, revealing that Christ perfectly understood the cycle of the soul. The message was clear, but it was hidden over time. The question now is, why hide something so essential? Jesus knew that speaking directly about reincarnation could shake the foundations of the religious system of the time. He chose to speak in parables, metaphors, and spiritual riddles, accessible only to those with ears to hear. Cayce reinforces this idea. Christ planted seeds of a profound truth that would only blossom when the world was ready. Today, with humanity's spiritual expansion and access to the wisdom of mediums like Cayce, these seeds are finally sprouting. We are faced with a revelation that connects the Master's teachings to the soul's ongoing journey. It's not just about being born and dying, but about learning, falling, and starting over, until we reach the divine light. The mention of Elijah is no coincidence. It's a window into one of humanity's greatest spiritual mysteries, and Cayce was the voice that dared to open it. How many other biblical passages hide the truth about the eternal soul? Perhaps everything you believed about Jesus in the Bible is only superficial. In the year 553, something changed forever in the course of Christianity. During the Second Council of Constantinople, a dogma was silently buried: the idea of reincarnation. Cayce reveals that this decision was not made by divine inspiration, but by political motivations and spiritual control. The soul, from then on, was trapped in a single chance. Before we move on, we want to feel the power of your presence. Comment below. From which city, state, or country are you watching us? Let's map this current of light and show how far our message is reaching. Write in the comments and let's expand this energy together. Why remove a doctrine that brought hope, evolution, and spiritual justice? The answer, according to Cayce, lies in power. If the soul had multiple lives, religious authority would lose the urgency of conversion and the fear of eternal hell. It was more profitable to keep the people trapped in the idea of a single, immediate salvation dependent on the church. Many writings by early Christian thinkers advocated the return of the soul. Origen, one of the greatest theologians of the early centuries, believed in pre-existence and reincarnation, but his work was condemned as heresy centuries later. Cayce reminds us that authentic spirituality is not afraid of truth, but human power is. During this council, the decision to erase reincarnation from official doctrine was made without the consent of the people. The ecclesiastical elite decided what should be forgotten and what should be remembered. Cayce denounces this manipulation as one of the greatest deviations from the Christian faith, and it still impacts millions of souls seeking answers today. Imagine how many lives could have been transformed if this truth had not been hidden. How many people would better understand their pain, their karma, their challenges. Cayce invites us to look beyond what we have been taught and seek the truths buried by history. Reincarnation for him was not a theory. It was a lived reality. And today, by recovering this knowledge, we free ourselves. We free faith from fear, the soul from guilt, and spirituality from control. Cayce gives us a key that many have sought to destroy. But as he himself said, truth can be buried, but never destroyed. What was silenced can now be heard. The Gospel of Thomas is not part of the traditional Bible. It was discovered buried in the Egyptian desert at Nag Hammadi in 1945, and quickly caught the attention of spiritual scholars like Edgar Cayce. It contained words attributed to Jesus, unlike any known. No miracles, no judgment, just pure, raw, and transformative wisdom. In this gospel, Jesus speaks directly about the inner light, the need for self-knowledge, and the return of the Spirit. Cayce highlighted one of the most intriguing phrases: "When you know yourselves, You will be known and understand that you are children of the living Father. It doesn't seem like a doctrine of heaven and hell, but rather of consciousness and evolution. Cayce saw in this gospel a forgotten key to original Christianity, where the soul was eternal, free, and responsible for its own ascension. Contrary to the punitive vision, this message reveals a more esoteric Christ, one who speaks to the soul and not just the body. Reincarnation here appears as a natural path for the soul in search of perfection. The Gospel of Thomas was rejected by the councils because it gave power to the individual. The Church could not accept that human beings possessed their own light, the capacity for personal redemption, and multiple opportunities for ascension. Cayce saw this text as a forgotten spiritual beacon, an echo of the true Jesus, hidden under centuries of religious control. If everything we learn about Jesus comes from an official reduced narrative, what else has been left out? Cayce makes us look with new eyes at the Master's words, not as dogma, but as spiritual codes of liberation. The Gospel of Thomas is one of these keys, and perhaps it explains why he was buried literally. Today we have the opportunity to reclaim these silenced voices, not to confront faith, but to expand it, to discover that the soul is not a prisoner of a single existence but a traveler on a long journey. As Cayce said, the soul moves toward the light through the shadows it must itself comprehend. In the Gospel of John, chapter 9, the disciples asked Jesus about a man born blind. Who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born this way? The question itself carries a powerful spiritual premise. How could someone sin before birth if they hadn't lived before? Cayce saw a forgotten truth here. Jesus doesn't rebuke the question, doesn't correct the notion of past lives. He simply responds that it happened so that the works of God might be displayed. For Cayce, this confirms that the disciples and Jesus had a natural understanding of reincarnation. It was part of the spiritual backdrop of that time. This biblical moment, ignored for centuries, holds one of the soul's greatest secrets. Cayce saw in this passage confirmation that pain is not punishment, but opportunity. Suffering, when understood in light of reincarnation, takes on another meaning, that of learning, reparation, and healing in cycles that span lives. Jesus heals the man, but he doesn't judge him. He doesn't accuse anyone of eternal error. He simply frees. And, according to Cayce, this liberation is symbolic, not just from the physical eyes, but from the cycle of ignorance in the soul. When we understand our trials as part of a continuous path, we stop seeing suffering as an end and begin to see it as a means. This teaching, so simple and powerful, was left on the margins of official doctrine, but Cayce brought it back, showing that the soul comes into the world to perfect itself, not to be condemned. Blindness from birth was not a punishment, but a mission, and God's forgiveness is as infinite as the number of lives He grants us. By understanding this miracle with spiritual eyes, everything changes. We begin to see our pain with compassion, our failures with more patience, and others with more empathy. Cayce said that each life is a lesson, each body an instrument, each challenge a bridge to the divine. And Jesus, as always, already knew this. Long before the councils erased reincarnation from Christian doctrine, one man dared to speak about it, Origen of Alexandria. A 3rd century theologian, he believed that the soul was created by God before birth and returned repeatedly until it reached perfection. Cayce saw in Origen an advanced spirit, bearer of a rejected truth. Origen taught that each person reaps what they sow, not just in this life but over the course of several existences. The idea of divine justice for him only made sense if the soul had other chances. Cayce advocated precisely this: karma as a mechanism for learning and balance. The soul is not punished. It is educated through experience. But in 553, during the Council of Constantinople, Origen was condemned. His ideas were called heresy. His texts were banned, his works erased. The reason? Reincarnation granted freedom to the spirit and autonomy to man. And this threatened the power of the religious hierarchy, based on fear and a single salvation. Cayce saw this judgment as one of the greatest spiritual losses in history. Not only was one man silenced, but an entire body of knowledge was buried. The Church chose dogma and abandoned depth. It chose control and forgot compassion. And millions began to live in fear of eternal damnation, unaware that the soul is reborn. Today, by reclaiming Origen, we reclaim part of our spiritual heritage. Edgar Cayce saw this gesture as an act of reparation through truth. It's not about destroying faith, but about re-illuminating it with what has been hidden. Origen wasn't wrong. He was simply born centuries before his words would be understood. And now that this time has come, we must look back and recognize reincarnation was never against Christ. It was part of the plan. Origen tried to show us. Cayce revived this call. The soul is eternal and its evolution does not end with death. It continues until it becomes light among the stars. In John 3:3, Jesus states, "Truly I tell you, unless one is born again, he cannot see the kingdom of God." For centuries, this phrase has been interpreted as a metaphor for spiritual change. But Cayce invites us to go further. What if Jesus was also talking about reincarnation? What if being born again was more literal than we thought? Nicodemus, hearing this statement, is confused. How can a man be born when he is old? This question shows that even at that time, the idea of returning to the womb was a strange concept but not impossible. Cayce emphasizes that Jesus does not deny the possibility. He simply elaborates, speaking of the birth of water and the Spirit. Cayce saw this dialogue as a conversation between two levels of consciousness. Nicodemus represented the rational mind, Jesus, the eternal wisdom. The master tried to explain that the soul must go through cycles, being born in the flesh, dying, returning, until it is ready to live fully in the Spirit. This is the journey of the soul's evolution. If reincarnation weren't real, why would Jesus have used the term born again with such emphasis? Cayce understood this phrase as the heart of Christ's spiritual doctrine, an invitation to profound transformation, not just in one lifetime, but over the course of several. A call to divine patience with our own mistakes. Reincarnation gives meaning to forgiveness, mercy, and God's timing. We are not saved by a single choice, but by a journey of learning. Jesus didn't speak of an instant miracle, but of constant refinement. Cayce emphasizes, the soul is not disposable. It is eternal, shaped by its successive experiences. Understanding this changes everything. It lifts the despair of immediate perfection from our shoulders and offers us a path of compassionate evolution. Jesus always knew this. And Cayce, with his spiritual mission, reminds us, being born again is not the end. It is merely the beginning of what the soul once committed to being. Jesus' parables always carried a sense of mystery. They spoke of seeds, harvests, buried talents, debtors, and masters. But for Cayce, these stories weren't just moral lessons. They were spiritual codes about the workings of the universe. Divine justice, he believed, was expressed through the law of karma. Whatever a man sows, that he will also reap. This teaching is not limited to this life. Cayce interpreted it as confirmation that today's actions shape the soul's future experiences. The parables viewed with this perspective become maps for understanding the cycle of cause and effect across multiple existences. Jesus spoke of unfaithful stewards who would lose everything, and of faithful servants who would be rewarded with more. He spoke of those who buried gifts and those who multiplied talents. For Cayce, all of this showed that the soul carries potentials and debts from previous lives, and each life is a new opportunity to correct, grow, and illuminate. The parable of the unmerciful servant, for example, depicts a forgiven man who refuses to forgive. Jesus concludes by saying that the man will be handed over to the executioners. Cayce saw this as a metaphor for karma. If we don't learn to forgive, we return until we do. The soul returns to the stage of pain until it understands the role of love. These stories speak of planting, but also of divine patience. God does not punish eternally. He educates with infinite opportunities. Cayce insisted, Jesus was not a judge, he was a teacher, and his parables, far from simple, were spiritual treatises for those ready to listen with an awakened heart. When we view these words through the lens of reincarnation, the New Testament gains a new light. Karma is not a punishment, it is an invitation. Each parable is a reminder that what we do today will echo in the soul's tomorrow. As Cayce said, the good you do does not die, it comes back to you. Always. At the heart of all Edgar Cayce's readings, a message repeated itself like a whisper from the universe itself. The soul is eternal. We are not bound to a single chance, nor to eternal damnation. Each incarnation is a classroom, a new opportunity to understand what we previously ignored. And Cayce never doubted this. In his more than 14,000 psychic sessions, Cayce saw recurring patterns. past life traumas echoing in the present, ancient talents reborn in new hands, destined souls meeting. For him, existence was not linear, but cyclical, and every pain was accompanied by a spiritual purpose. Cayce said that suffering is the result of a misunderstood action, not as guilt, but as an opportunity for growth. The soul, according to him, returns as many times as necessary until it learns to love, to forgive, to serve, not because God demands it, but because the soul only finds peace when it lives in harmony with the divine. This perspective completely changes our relationship with error. We are not flawed beings destined for eternal punishment, but expanding consciousnesses honed by experience. Reincarnation, for Cayce, was proof of God's unconditional love, which allows us to always try again, until we understand the true meaning of existence. Jesus, with his compassionate silence and profound teachings, left the clues. Cayce, with his courage and faith, decoded them. And today it is up to us to heed this call, not to fear life or death, but to honor the soul's path with humility and awareness. The spirit that understands this stops seeking answers outside and begins to build within, because as Cayce said, the soul that learns to love no longer needs to return. It becomes part of the light that never goes out. And perhaps this is what Jesus wanted to teach us from the beginning. With all this, one certainty remains. Much has been hidden, but never lost. Edgar Cayce not only revealed forgotten truths, he restored to us the courage to question, to feel, and to seek. Jesus' words, interpreted in the light of reincarnation, open a new door to spiritual understanding. Perhaps the soul's greatest mission is not to blindly believe, but to remember what the heart already knew. And if you've come this far, perhaps you're ready for that remembrance. Now I ask you, what if reincarnation is the missing link between Jesus' teachings and the divine justice your heart has always sought? If this reflection touched you in any way, subscribe to the channel and share this video with someone who needs to hear it today. Together we will reveal what has been censored and illuminate what has been hidden. Leave your comment saying, "The truth sets the soul free," and continue this journey with us.